Sid, I think we might have forgot to mention at the top of the show, but we are going to be talking about Ajin Demi-Human. We did want to talk about it on the last episode with Casey because me and Sid had wanted to read something somewhat horror-related for Halloween, but we figured we'd just kind of let Casey talk about his recommendations and we would save our thoughts on Ajin for another time, and that time being this episode. So just to kind of help transition into that, Ajin Demi-Human is going to be getting a live-action movie. So that's cool. And Takeru Sato, who I think probably made it, I would argue made his breakthrough during his time as the main character of Kamen Rider Den-O, which, even if you're not a Tokusatsu fan, please go watch Kamen Rider Den-O. Like, such a good, like, Kamen Rider series. Is really super popular for a while, too. Had a lot of movies. You might also know him as Kenshin from the Rurouni Kenshin live-action movies. And like I said, he's going to be portraying the main character of Ajin, Kei Nagai, in this live-action Ajin movie. And looks like they're going to be somewhat tweaking the setting a little bit. Because apparently the film's setting will be taking place in Tokyo during the year of 2017, and apparently in the film, Kei will be a medical intern with his age basically written to match Sato's, Sato being 27 years old, so I don't have any problems with those changes personally.
Sato's an old man, though, in the manga. He's not 27, so... No,
Takeru Sato. Like, Takeru Sato... Yeah.
Okay. Okay, no, well, that makes more sense. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to age up the characters. Like, Nagai is a middle schooler in the manga, so unless they got a really good middle school actor, they're gonna have to age him up. And with a character like Kei Nagai, definitely they need a really good actor to do a very complex character like that, and I don't know if a child actor could really pull that off. So I guess this is a good choice, I'd say, gauge him up a bit.
Yeah, I think that we can look forward to this live action movie. So far, I don't have any problems with this idea at all. It's so far so good. We should probably, unless you have anything else to say about the live action movie, Sid, I think maybe we should just get into our discussion about Ajin.
Yes, I think that'll be good. So,
me and Sid both. I don't think this was planned at all. Like, I only decided to read Ajin just because, like... See, I talked about this on the last episode. Like, because I have the first prototype volume of Mizuki's Kitaro, and I'm sitting here like, what do I read for Halloween? I guess I'll read Ajin. And I'm like... And then when I think back on it, I'm like, I don't know why I didn't just read Kitaro, because I haven't read it yet, and I really should. But, that's neither here nor there.
Interestingly enough, just not to go on a super long tangent, but I found it really funny that when I went to the comic book store recently, and just very recently, like after we had recorded our Halloween episode, I ended up picking up a bunch of horror-related titles. I picked up Kazuhiro Fujita's Black Museum, Jujito's Fragments of Horror, and, yes, a Kitaro book. Because they were all on sale at that bookstore I go to. But I found it hilarious that it happened after we recorded our Halloween episode. Like, wow. Like, that was pretty unfortunate timing. I am looking forward to reading a lot of these, especially Fujita's Black Museum, because I know a lot of people who have been really looking forward to and really enjoying that.
Me and Sid had wanted to read something horror-related, and it just so happened we both picked Ajin for some reason.
Yeah, it was on Crunchyroll. It's pretty easy to read, so it's just convenient.
So, yeah, I had seen Ajin around for a while, and, like, the covers of a lot of the volumes don't give you a lot to go on, because a lot of every cover of every volume of Ajin just features, like, this blackened, mummified ghost creature, which I thought was an interesting design. I was like, ooh, this looks scary. I'll get around to it someday. And I know there's an anime for it on, it's sort of a quote-unquote Netflix exclusive that I think is even dubbed, too, if people want to check that out. I'm definitely planning on checking out the anime, hopefully soon, actually, because I am kind of interested in how they handle the material.
I got introduced through Ajin through the anime because my brother showed me the first 2 episodes of it at one of our notorious Wii parties. Those are parties where my brother throws, where he invites all his friends and they spend the entire night playing video games and watching anime. And that was a really interesting particular Wii party because that lasted literally 36 hours straight.
Jesus!
Like, they came on Saturday at noon. They came at Saturday at noon, and then they left, like, the following evening or whatever. So it was like 2 days. Our house was, like, full of kids who were all, like, all off doing their own thing at some points, and then regrouping back together. Like it was a cacophony of noise and like craziness. It was an interesting time. But yeah, so at some point, my brother put on Ajin, to show us, and we watched the first 2 episodes because he watched the entire anime before, like when Netflix put it up, and like he really really liked it. So he wanted to get us into it. So we watched the first 2 episodes, and I found it interesting. I found it a little bit interesting, but I didn't get totally into it for some whatever reason. Maybe it might have been the pacing, maybe the CG animation. I'm not sure. I was interested, but I wasn't like totally hooked on the story and material yet. But wanted to read the manga at some point. So I put that on my to-do list, but then I just forgot about it for a couple months. And then later, come October, we were deciding, yeah, let's read some horror manga for when we have Casey on. And it's like, well, I don't want to really buy anything because I bought like a bunch of stuff already this month. What we're going to Comic-Con, and then a bunch of digital manga I bought recently, so I was like, I'll just read something for free. What's on Crunchyroll? And Ajin, I remember, I was like, I was interested in that, so yeah, I'll just read it, see where it goes. And basically, when Ajin starts out, it's very similar in feel to Tokyo Ghoul.
Yes.
Basically, in the sense that the main character discovers that he is a part of this group of subhumans or creatures that are not considered human. They look like human, but they are ostracized and they are feared by normal people. There's a government agency devoted to hunting them down and suppressing them. So, and the main character kind of has to come to terms with the fact that he is this inhuman creature now, and like grapple with this understanding of his own humanity, like what his sense of humanity is now that he is quote-unquote inhuman. So at the start, it feels similar to Tokyo Ghoul. However, the direction it takes is very different, because rather than musing on these like more philosophical aspects and, just focusing on like this more dark unpleasantness or whatever, it becomes more of an action title, and it becomes a really good action title. Like, it uses this concept of the fact that the Ajin can't die, that they are immortal, to its advantage in really creative and fun ways. So all the Ajin are able to do these really cool action stunts and like crazy, ridiculous things because they are free from the fear of death and the consequences of death. So there's a lot of really cool action sequences that can come out of that, like Sato crashing a plane into a city, or this really crazy scheming he does later on in the manga, where he cuts off his arm, then he mails it into this building, and then he destroys his body in a wood chipper so that he can regenerate from his severed arm inside the building.
That was honestly probably like one of the best parts of that entire series, honestly. It
was insane. Like, Sato, I'm just going to come out right now and say it, is one of the best villains in any currently running manga series. He is not only freaking badass, but he is chilling in his methods, in his, like, personality and outlook, and, like, what he's capable of, and what he wants to do. Like, he is a really cool villain, and Colton and I, remarked about this before, off mic, but he looks like an Urasawa character. Like, not just in terms of his design, with, his facial features, his prominent nose, but because of the way he's written, too, he feels like a character you would see in something like 20th Century Boys, Billy Bat, or Monster. This really sinister, really disturbing, amoral character who feels so inhuman and so threatening in, like, a way that is so and feels so actually very human, and that's what makes it all the more disturbing. So I really, really love Sato as a villain. Like, Sato is probably my favorite character, my favorite part of the manga, but another, like, really great aspect of the manga is the main character, Kei Nagai himself. And I was expecting from Kei Nagai that he'd be much like the main character of Tokyo Ghoul, Ken Kaneki, and that he would be broody, he would be mumbling a lot, he'd be complaining and have all this self-identity crisis, and, eventually at some point he would break and become emo or whatever.
Yeah.
But Kei Nagai is not like that at all. Like, from the beginning, we don't get a huge sense of who he is, but as the story goes on, we start to get more of a sense of that. And Nagai does not think of how a traditional protagonist does, or how we consider a traditional good person does. Like, he is very self-centered, very concerned about his own survival, and at a certain point, he decides to discard and not care about other people other than himself at all, and is willing to go to any lengths to protect himself. When Ko comes to his aid, instead of agreeing to help him fight Sato, he decides to just lock Ko away in this truck, and so he wouldn't have to be bothered with that. And he says this really disturbing line, is that, "Don't worry, I'll give you some stimuli. After all, the human brain can only go 72 hours without any form of stimulation." So a lot of the sense we get of Kei Nagai at the start is that he is this really not immoral, I keep using that word for some reason, but he doesn't think quite right in the traditional sense. He doesn't think like you would expect.
He sees everything very logically. He doesn't think with any kind of emotion at all. At least not at the start.
He's not emotionally driven. He is very much a rationalist. And so from the perception that you would think is that the series is going to go out and develop him to a point where he decides that his rationalist way of thinking is quote-unquote wrong, and he needs to learn to become more emotional, and in that sense regain his humanity that way. But in a really cool and I think very welcome twist on that in the most recent chapters is that the series explains that Kei Nagai's rationalist thinking is not a bad thing necessarily, and it doesn't make him a bad person. It's just a way of thinking that is different from how others think. But he is still a human being, and we do see that he does care about people. He will go, and he will be driven to do the right thing out of a sense of justice inside him. And the biggest contrast to Nagai is Ko, who is very much this very energetic, very shonen-y character who is very outspoken about his feelings and is very much driven by emotion over reason in his actions. And they form a good contrast, those characters. And neither character is portrayed as in the wrong in their outlook or their way of thinking. I mean, Ko is kind of an idiot, which is, hilarious. I love some of his exchanges with Nagai. Early on in the series, when they start working together, Nagai asks him you're given three choices when you walk into a battlefield. You can have amazing intelligence, you can have an amazingly strong body, or you can be immortal. Which would you choose? And Ko answers, well, duh, I'll choose a strong body. And then the guy is like, yes, that's right. Everyone would say they would choose immortality. Like, he doesn't even acknowledge that Ko told him the wrong answer. Like, it's just an amazingly funny moment. Like, there's just a lot of great moments between Nagai and Ko like that. That's just great. But, the contrast between those characters is very purposeful because Nagai represents this rationalist outlook, this rationalist person, and then Ko is this emotionally driven person. But they are both representing aspects of humanity, and they both demonstrate their own sense of humanity, their own sense of morality and right and wrong as the series progresses. Neither is depicted as necessarily right or wrong, but both are depicted as human and as ways that a person can live and live functionally and live well and are well-adjusted ways of approaching the world and approaching life. And I really enjoyed, where that comes to, because in the most recent chapters, Kei phones his mother, to let him know what's up with him. And at the beginning of the series, early on, we are led to believe that his mother, like others who, when they discovered Kei was a demi-human, was shocked and then dismissed him as inhuman and, lost all respect or care for him and just saw him as subhuman. But
basically severed ties with him.
Yeah, but that's not the case at all, it seems. Because when we check in on his mother, her attitude towards him is very casual. Her opinion of him hasn't changed at all. He is still her son, but we see where Kei's idea of thinking kind of comes from, because Kei's mother is very much this rationalist person. She flat out says, well, I can't really do anything for you, but best of luck to you. But it's not like she doesn't care about him. It's just she's very logical and very reasonable in her way of thinking, and knows what she can and cannot do, and lets that inform her decisions. And she talks with her daughter, Kei's sister, about this difference in rationality in way of thinking that Kei and her have from her daughter and other people, and how that affects the perception of them. It's Kei, she makes a point that saying Kei isn't a bad person for thinking the way he does, but it's a way of surviving, and it's a way of surviving that is right. And feelings aren't enough to help people. Caring thoughts aren't enough to help people. It's impossible for everyone to care for everyone, and there isn't a whole lot one person alone can do. But the best way to help someone is to make something happen and go out of your way to help those you really care about. And Kei is a person who does that. Kei looks at a situation he's in, and he prioritizes what he cares about, and he puts everything into doing that thing he cares about, whether it's helping someone else or whether it is his own sake of survival. And it isn't right to simply label him as a cold person. He just has a different way of thinking than other people and a different sense of humanity, morality, and justice than other people. It's really interesting. The whole idea behind the series is basically your actions and how you treat and interact with other people will dictate how you as a person are perceived, and also how you yourself perceive your own humanity. Because earlier on in the series, when Kei and Ko team up with the inspector, Tosaka, I believe is his name.
Tosaki. Not Tozaki. Tosaki. And that's the running
yes,
joke.
Yes, Tosaki. So they team up with Tosaki, and, we see that Kei at first feels a little bit of jealousy towards Ko, because Ko fits in with Tosaki's team very well and, becomes friends with him really easily, while Kei is very isolated, and he keeps to himself. But he feels jealous of the attention Ko receives and the fact that Ko is able to be so friendly with people. But he's advised by Hirasawa, who sort of becomes this mentor figure to him, that's not necessarily a bad thing, that Kei is like the way he is, because letting yourself getting astray by emotions or like making friends with people is not really what he's there to do. And he can choose how he wants to operate himself and how he wants to work in this team and prioritize what he wants to do and what he wants to get out of working with Tosaka and Ko. And I really enjoy the relationship between Nagai and Hirasawa and like how that comes to a head.
Yeah, I love where that goes, honestly. Like I wasn't really expecting to become so attached to Hirasawa as much as I did, but I love where all that goes and how that sort of comes to fruition, because I feel like Kei sort of became a better person out of that relationship.
Still, he still has his rationalist way of thinking, but he also now is more driven to protect others for their sake more than his sake, because he originally joins Tozaki's group for his own kind of self-protection, because he realizes that what Sato is doing is going to demonize demi-humans even further and make it harder for him to survive.
Yeah, like just to...
So he just wants to...
I'm sorry, I was going to say, just to go back to what you were saying earlier, I like how Kei doesn't necessarily change as a person. Like I like that the series is pretty much like they don't demonize his way of thinking completely anyway. Like I'm really surprised at Kei as a character, because when I was first in the beginning of the series, like, people had told me that like, oh, Kei is really a nothing character, like he's not really anything special. And I'm just like, okay, fine. Like, insert yourself here, main characters. Okay, sure. I like that was the kind of character I was expecting. Like, somebody that like the reader could kind of put themselves in the shoes of. And I was kind of prepared for a character like that. But what we got was a character a lot more complex than I could have really ever expected. Because what I love about Ajin is that it kind of plays with your perceptions of the main character. Because, at first, we get all these different perspectives on, like, on Kei and his personality and how they are perceived. Like, his sister thinks that he's a total asshole, essentially.
Right.
And they at the beginning, they introduce character's childhood friend, Kai, which... By the way, I hate how all these names are so, similar to each other.
I mean, there's another character called Keisuke, who's the subject of one chapter, who's also a friend of Kei's. And that's an interesting chapter, but yeah, like, there's Kei, Kai, Keisuke, Ko. There are a lot of characters.
Keiichi.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hate how similar all these names are, but, like, they... we see a moment from his past when Kei and Kai, they were childhood friends and they did a lot of stuff together. They played together, but I think his mom realizes that he was a demi-human. So that we get this moment where his mom's basically like, "Hey, give me your phone. I'm gonna delete your friend's contact number," and we're kind of led to we're kind of assuming that, oh, wow, like, that kind of sucks. Like, he had to stop spending time with his friend. When we get, Kei's sister's side of the story, we find out that, oh, Kei was okay with just, letting his mom do that because, his mom gave him a reason because, she basically rationalized why he shouldn't be friends with Kai anymore. And Kei was just like, okay, I see your point. And to his sister, that was very cold and very it's just it wasn't cool, like, oh, how could you throw away your friend like that? But we kind of like, as the reader, I feel like I'm like being tossed back and forth between, oh yeah, Kei's an asshole. Oh yeah, hey, Kei actually does kind of a point. I do kind of agree with him. Like, I found it interesting how many times I found myself kind of agreeing and disagreeing with Kei's perspective on life and how he chooses to deal with certain relationships. And especially, I think one of my favorite, probably my favorite chapter of the entire series so far is his back and forth with Ko after Sato's raid on the security building, and after everything is said and done, how, Kei is basically like, oh, well, you cared about this one person that died because, you knew him, but what if a million people in some random country died? Would you really care about them? Are you going to do anything about that? And it's like, I feel like Kei's a good device for the story to use to kind of bring up these different questions of morality and how you react to certain things. Like, I found that kind of battle of ideologies very interesting, and I felt it led to a lot of very poignant emotional moments for me personally.
That chapter 43, definitely kind of really encapsulates that the different sense of ideologies that are at play in this manga, that the manga explores, this rationalism versus emotionally driven logic. And I think it's really, really interesting the way Kei Nagai is presented and developed as a character, because when we are first introduced to these questionable sides of him, I believe the mangaka is purposely trying to trick us into thinking, oh, this is a wrong thing, this guy is disturbed, he's not right. But it's a bait and switch kind of thing, because as he develops a story, we see more inside of Kei's head, and we kind of start to understand his thought process a little better, and we also kind of realize, no, his way of thinking isn't necessarily wrong. Both Kei and Tozaki do morally questionable and morally dubious things to achieve their own ends. And there are some things that they do that you would say good people would not do, or a good person wouldn't think to do, but they aren't bad people, and the series goes out of the way to show that they aren't bad people. Like, they do what they do for purposeful reasons, and what they do isn't always right, but their sense of rationality and the way they look at the world isn't a wrong way to look at the world. It is a perfectly valid and legitimate way of looking at the world, and a way of behaving and acting upon real life. And Kei, in particular, isn't out to hurt anybody necessarily. Like, when we originally were told a story about him abandoning Ko as a friend as a child because his parents...
As Kai.
Kai, yes, Kai as a child.
See what I mean?
But Ko and Kai also look similar, so it's kind
of... Yeah, I know. Isn't that weird? That really kind of bothered me at first, too. I was like, hey, it's Kai. Oh, wait, that's not him. He literally has almost the same blonde hair. I'm sorry, go on.
But yeah, so abandoning Kai as a child, like he does this as a kid because, yeah, being friends with the son of this ex-prisoner is going to be a black spot and, like, not be helpful in my future endeavor and career in becoming, like, a doctor and in my studies. So that makes sense to me. Like, is it right thing to do? Maybe not, but it isn't also the wrong thing to do, necessarily. Like, for Kei, that was the most logical and reasonable option for him to take in pursuit of his goal of becoming a doctor and in pursuing his studies. And Kei has always lived his life like that. He's lived with this rationalism, like, to do what is the most logical and what is the best for him. But as the series goes on, he expands that sense of rationality into doing not as what only best for him, but is what's best for the people he cares about and what's around him. And what's great about Kei as this anti-hero character is that he's not out to save millions of people or save the world, but he's out to save the people he cares about the most. And as explained in the chapter where he talks with his mother, and as what his mother tells us about him, when Kay is determined to do something, he does it with all his effort. And so now, as he's approaching, this next phase of the story, I think it's going to be really interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, so at the time of this recording, Ajin is about 44 chapters long, and I believe is released monthly.
Yeah.
And personally, I think this next phase of the story coming up could be the final one.
I think so, because it feels to me like they reached kind of a pretty conclusive point thematically in what the series is trying to go with this reason versus emotion way of thinking that's been developed throughout the story. It's kind of made its thesis point moment here, with the chapter 44, the discussion between Kay and his mother, and then Kay's ultimate decision to go after Sato to protect those he cares about. So definitely this next phase of the story I think is going to be the final phase. How long that will be, I'm not sure, but I definitely think it's going to be entering into an ending of sorts.
Yeah. I mean, I think one other thing I think I really liked about Ajin, there was a moment that really struck me during, I guess, the this last arc that happened when they're basically fighting Sato and his goons in the security building with Tanaka of all people. Who it's just now occurring to me that Tanaka's technically the first character that appears in the manga, because in the beginning we see a lot of this. Because there's a lot of Demi-Human experimentation going on in the beginning of the manga, which Kay is unfortunately dragged into himself, and it seems, I think from what we can tell, Tanaka seemed to be the first Demi-Human that Sato rescues and has him makes him a part of his gang or his little posse or whatnot, and so that to me that element kind of makes this even more interesting, and I kind of want to see where his development goes, because at first I didn't really have any real stake in Tanaka. He's just Sato's right-hand guy. He just, he's just a guy, whatever. He's just around helping Sato do whatever. And I think I think some potential for some good character development really opened up in this last arc. And I think one of my favorite moments in the series is where, because Tanaka, through certain circumstances, ends up dressed up as a police officer to basically try to camouflage himself to, I think, try to get out of the building safely or whatnot with Sato. And there's this moment where he ends up fighting Tosaki's right-hand woman, Shimomura, who herself also has a very sad backstory in how she became a demi-human. And that was, I couldn't handle some of that stuff. That was some really sad stuff, honestly.
All the characters in the series are really interesting and are very morally complex, and some of them have this tragic element to the character. Shimomura is probably the most tragic character of all the characters, but like that final shot of her IBM ghost stand, whatever you want to call it, embracing her while she's sleeping in that tiny room for rent, I think is probably one of the most powerful images in the entire series. Especially considering when because it feels like, oh, she finally has somebody that so somebody's finally embracing her, and it looks like, oh, well, somebody cares about her finally. And it's just kind of funny that in the wake of her becoming a demi-human, that she sort of finally finds some peace. It's I thought that was very very powerful. But the moment I really wanted to get to that I thought was really impressive was Tanaka ends up fighting Shimomura with their ghosts and whatnot, and Tanaka ultimately has the upper hand. He ends up winning the battle and handcuffs her when some of the other employees of the building come in, and they find out, oh, she's another demi-human, and start gawking at her, taking pictures and stuff. And as Tanaka's leaving,
like you could see it in his expression that like, yeah, like Shimomura is technically the enemy, but he kind of starts to like share it. In that moment he shares a connection with her, in that they're both demi-humans, and like he knows what it's like to be, ostracized and gawked at and like inflicted pain upon. Like he kind of feels for her, and he doesn't really like that she has to go through that same thing. So like, I wasn't expecting this at first. Like goes back and like uncuffs her, I think he takes his anger out on a lot of the other employees gawking at her, and I thought like he kind of starts to develop this way of thinking where he's kind of wondering, about whether what Sato is doing is right. And it's just like, I found Tanaka's character development in that arc really interesting, and I really liked where it went. I don't know how you felt about it, Sid.
Yeah, I mean, it was really a really good moment. He goes out of his way to basically save Shimomura's life because, Tosaki wasn't going to cover up for her. Like, maybe he would, we don't know, but presumably, like, when Shimomura is exposed to these other police officers, like, she is going to suffer the same fate as the other Ajin would, like, being experimented on and tortured. But in this moment, Tanaka, like, he goes back and, like, he kills a lot of police officers and all the other witnesses so that Shimomura, wouldn't get found out and, like, her secret is safe. So it's really a good moment for him. Like, he does what he thinks is right in this moment because even though, like, Shimomura is technically his enemy, like, he doesn't want her to suffer the same fate like he kind of suffered. But also, like, another moment that I think really stands out to me is the fact that he basically protects, like, the woman who is responsible for torturing him previously when he was, like, a prisoner. And it was a really interesting moment because, like, he thinks, like, he has every right to want to kill this woman for what she did to him, but he decides that he doesn't want to take her life and isn't right for, like, this person to die because, in the end, she also did do it unwittingly. Like, she didn't want to, but she was kind of forced to by her bosses. So he tries to help her escape the building. And so then Sato arrives on the scene, and he, like, points his gun at her, and Tanaka steps in front of her, and Sato's like, "What are you doing, Tanaka?" And Tanaka's like, "I don't care what happens to me or what you're going to do to me, but I won't let you kill this woman." And, like, at that moment, he's willing to go against Sato, just to protect this person's life. And this person who, by all accounts, he should absolutely hate and who he should want to kill himself, but he believes is wrong to kill. And I thought that was a really cool moment. And I also just liked Sato's reaction after that, when he's like, "Okay, yeah, if you don't want her to die, like, whatever."
Hey, okay, whatever.
I mean,
Sure.
I mean, Sato himself doesn't have anything against the woman, and it's really, like... So, I mean, that was a really cool exchange between Sato and Tanaka, because Sato really also doesn't have necessarily anything to gain from killing the woman or making Tanaka his enemy. So it's also in that moment, so it's like, okay, I don't really care. So, it's also just another great Sato moment, as well as much as it is Tanaka moment. But
point being, I really want to see where Tanaka's character goes, and I really want to see how he's used in the story.
I definitely think it's going to be paid off in the final arc of the series, because it is Tanaka's, like, discontent and, like, his mixed feelings about what he and Sato are doing have been something that was gradually being developed throughout the course of the manga. Like, yeah. It culminates in this point, and so even though Tanaka and Sato are still, teammates afterwards, like, definitely Tanaka isn't 100% on board what Sato is doing anymore, and it's going to be interesting to see if he goes against him again in the future, and in what circumstance that will be.
No, yeah, I agree. I can't wait to see where that goes. I think one of the only other things I want to talk about before we move on and wrap up here is, I found what I found interesting was because something interesting about the series in particular is that and I'm forgetting their names off the top of my head, but the manga was written originally written and drawn by a duo. But for some reason, I don't think there's any official reasoning out there that you could find. But unfortunately, at some point, the duo behind Ajin broke up, and so I think you kind of tell that in the art a little bit at some point, because there are some points I think around volume 3 or 4 where like Tozaki looks kind of off, and you could tell that like Sato by the current chapter of the manga does not look like the same person he did in the beginning. He definitely, for some reason, looks a lot older. Like I think it's interesting that he looks more like his age by this last arc, and I think that's because from what I understand, the two people behind Ajin were both responsible for the story, but one of them in particular was responsible for the art. So what I'm gonna say is maybe they had some disagreements with where they wanted to take the story, or maybe they just didn't get along, and one of them ended up quitting, and that left one of them to have to write the story and draw the series. And I think at some point you can tell that maybe because of that, like you could tell maybe that kind of took took its toll on whoever was left, and you could tell that at some point the art kind of degrades a little bit. But I think that the newer the more current style definitely comes to fruition. It becomes a lot more polished. It becomes I don't know, like I think the style that is drawn in now, I think surprisingly looks a lot more appealing than when it first was published.
Well, I think that's just the natural evolution of the art, because it's been the same artist working on it since the beginning, Gaemon Sakurai. He, at the beginning of the series, the story was done by Suina Miura. But of course, after like the first 2 or 3 volumes worth of chapters, Miura has left the series, and now it's just been all Sakurai who's been drawing and writing the series. But it's been the same artist since the beginning, so I think it's just a natural evolution, refinement.
Well, I know, but what I'm saying is I've been seeing that they're both credited with the story.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm saying I think maybe at some point they had a disagreement as to where maybe they wanted to take their series narrative-wise, and maybe that's the reason why they broke up. But again, this is all speculation. None of this is confirmed or based in fact. This is just what I think possibly might have happened. But what I'm saying is I think you can tell that the art at some point kind of takes a little bit of a dip in terms of how the characters are drawn for like a little bit. But I think he rebounds back just fine, though, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I didn't notice it like too much, but I definitely thought the art got, especially towards like the current Jordan chapters, it looks like even better, like it's super polished. Because
I did a lot of comparing and contrasting between Sato in the beginning and Sato now, and he totally looks like he looks like he aged at like 10 years. Like it's kind of ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Like he did not look that old in the beginning. But I think, like, at first I thought it was kind of jarring, but like the further I read, I think the more used to it I got, and the more I was kind of all for it, because I think the way he's drawn now does a way better job of showing his age.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, if you look at Sato in the beginning, like as early as chapter 3, like he definitely looks a lot younger, and he looks like he kind of looks like a young, very idealistic person who's out to, change the world and whatnot. And like by the time the way he's drawn changes, like he looks like he's seen some shit, because we get all this backstory about how he used to participate in the Vietnam War and all that. And like I think the way he's drawn now, like he looks like he's been through war. He looks more experienced, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And I kind of appreciate that, honestly.
Before we move on, though, I want to, because I think, we might have been going back and forth, like, switching between, like, various different topics, like, when discussing Ajin here. So I want to, like, right at the end, very focused, give, like, why you should read Ajin, like a straightforward recommendation. Ajin is a really exceptional horror action series, primarily delving in psychological horror. It is focused on the main theme of what it means to be a human being, what is this idea of humanity, and how do we decide what is right or wrong. Unlike other series like Tokyo Ghoul, which approach these topics in this very more over-the-top cartoonish way with antagonists that are very kind of easy to describe as cartoonishly like black and white evil, and so thus robbing the kind of morally ambiguous nature of the series of really any weight or true mature depth. Ajin really perfectly encapsulates this moral gray area and moral ambiguity. The main characters are very morally ambiguous in their actions, but they never go too far to the point where you can say, no, I don't buy that. That guy is clearly a bad guy. As the series goes on, you really do come to understand each character's way of thinking, and you get to understand why the way they are, and you also get to understand why the perspective on what right and wrong is, at least for them, if not maybe something you personally prescribe to or aspire to, it is not a wrong way of thinking. And I really think that it is such a refreshing outlook and a refreshing different perspective from what you'll usually see in just any kind of series like this. Because in any other series, Kay would either be presented as a villain protagonist, as someone who is doing the wrong thing and whose way of thinking is supposed to be wrong, or he would go off the deep end and become this emo character for a little while before realizing that he needs to lighten up and like do what's right, kind of like Kaneki and Tokyo Ghoul's kind of character arc is. Kei's arc is much more complex, and he as a character is much more complex than that, and much more nuanced than that. I think that Kei Nagai is one of the most interesting and really complex and fascinating protagonists I've read in a currently running manga that's going on right now. I also think that Sato similarly is one of the best antagonists that I have read in a manga in a long while, and in any currently running manga right now. I think that the series is an exceptionally creative action series in the way it uses the Ajin's powers to not die, to do these crazy stunts and these really cool, really inventive action sequences that really play on your expectations and are really a sight to behold. The artwork is fantastic. The pacing is fantastic. The exploration of the themes, of morality, of what's right and wrong, of humanity, it is all very pitch perfect, very fantastic, very palpable, and it never feels forced. It always feels natural. And the story is such an addicting read. It's such an engaging read, beginning to end. And I highly, highly recommend Ajin. I think it is probably one of the best currently running titles out there. It's legally available on Crunchyroll for you to read it. And if you haven't, it's being published by Vertical, if you would rather read it in graphic and print format. I highly recommend it. It was a really pleasant surprise, and it's an insanely good read.
I kind of want to go off of what you were talking about, what you were saying. I was really afraid at first that this was just going to be another Tokyo Ghoul, because as I've said on the podcast before, again, I know I should read more, but man, Tokyo Ghoul just didn't really grab me like I wanted it to. And I don't know if I really have a ton of interest in going back to it anytime soon. But I feel like Ajin gave me a little bit more to latch onto. I think it gave, I just, personally, as far as the beginning goes, I thought Ajin was a little more interesting in the way where, like, you kind of sort of hit the ground running. Like, it's, like the story just starts. Like, like Kay is just on the run from everyone, and you're like, okay, well, where is this going to go? Like the series doesn't give you a lot of time to really like sit around and think about what happened, which is, I like personally, I think is what kind of turned me off of Tokyo Ghoul, was because I didn't like Tokyo Ghoul didn't really give me enough about Kaneki to really care about him as a character. I just thought it was a lot of, oh no, I'm this thing. What am I going to do now that I'm this thing? And I felt like a lot of the first volume was that, and I just wasn't interested because I didn't really know enough about him to really become invested in him. Whereas, I'm not saying that Ajin gave me a lot of that at the beginning either, but like, at least we're kind of thrown into the middle of the action and you want to know, where it's going to go. And I feel like Ajin, near the end of the first volume in particular, I felt like did a better job of hooking me, but this is just me personally. So I am glad that this didn't just turn out to be another Tokyo Ghoul. Like, I completely agree that, like, I feel like this is a better execution of what Tokyo Ghoul wants to do. And I was honestly surprised that I ended up liking the series as much as I did. And I think, honestly, it gets a totally solid 100% recommendation from me. Like, if you're not reading this, you should give it a try. It is so good. And honestly, I think it's also worth mentioning that this might be the first monthly manga that I start keeping up with, because I don't like keeping up with monthly manga because I feel like I always I'm afraid of losing the momentum of reading the story, reading it in monthly chunks, but I gotta keep reading this. Like, I need to know what happens next. And that's really special to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Ajin is such a... I think I'm glad I marathoned Ajin, especially at the point that we caught up to it, because that was... Chapter 44 was such a great capstone to, like, catching up to the series. Like, that kind of perfect timing. Like, yeah. I remember with that was, like, just a really lucky break. I remember I had the same kind of experience when I caught up with A Silent Voice, like, way back in the day. Like, I caught up, like, right at the chapter where Shoya falls off the roof. And it's like, what the heck? And so, yeah, that was a fun 20 weeks of keeping up with the final run of that series. But, like, yeah, so, Ajin... I mean, to go back to the Tokyo Ghoul comparisons, now, I don't want to, like, say that, I dislike Tokyo Ghoul. I do enjoy Tokyo Ghoul, but, like, Ajin does what Tokyo Ghoul tries to do with the themes it tackles in a much more mature and a much more multifaceted way. It explores more angles with its characters, and it has a more complex variety of characters with different levels of morality and the sense of moral justice to them. That is much more interesting to me than in Tokyo Ghoul, where you do kind of have these clearly good and clearly bad people, and, like, so the sense of morality and the sense of question of humanity and right and wrong isn't really as well explored. Because when you have in Tokyo Ghoul the society of ghouls who force humans to fight in a coliseum and then eat the losers, like, I mean, you kind of lose your ability to maturely develop an interesting angle on what you're trying to say about humanity, or, or a sense of right and wrong, or whatever. But, Ajin is one of the best treatments of that subject matter that I have ever read. I might even say it tackles the subject better than Parasite, and I thought that series tackled its subject really excellently, and I love that series. Like, Ajin is really, really excellent. Like, it is mature in the respect that what it really means to be mature in terms of how it develops its characters and its ideas, and, like, the way it presents its ideas. It isn't a series of easy answers, of easy morality, and it doesn't have any truly black and white characters in it. There are some times where you feel like there is this black and white sensibility, but as the series goes on, you realize, no, like, a lot of these people are pretty justified in the way they're thinking, either because they don't know any better or because that's simply the way they live. Not only that, but even the most disturbing and the most inhuman character, Sato, himself feels like a real person. Like, he feels like a believable human being with a believable, like, goal. I mean, not really goal, but kind of a believable personality.
He has believable ideals, I think, too.
Well, he's not really about ideals. Like, Sato's whole thing is that he just wants to have a good time.
This is true. He just wants
to cause like havoc and chaos for the sake of his own personal fun. And in another series, like, that could make him out to be this very shallow, very one-dimensional kind of character, but he doesn't feel shallow, he doesn't feel one-dimensional in Ajin. Like, there is more to him, even though his goal is so simple, and you can see, like, why a person like Sato would simply want to just have fun, and would go through all this ridiculous lengths just to satiate this, like, craving for excitement he needs in his life as someone who cannot die, and as someone who, like, having as lived as long as him, finds it hard to become excited or find pleasure in things as easily anymore. Sato is an incredibly fascinating character in that respect, incredibly fascinating villain, and as I've said before, one of the best I've seen. And the series, just in general, is full of characters who are morally complex, even if their goal seems simple. Like, the way they approach their goal and their way of thinking, none of them are completely black and white, good or evil, and I just find that really interesting, because this is, like, the best handling. There's a lot of series that try to handle, like, cast of morally ambiguous characters, but Ajin is one of the best examples of doing that I've seen since maybe Vinland Saga. So, yeah, high recommendation.
Yeah, like, this could have easily gone wrong, but thankfully it didn't.
Yeah.
So go read it is what we're trying to say.
Basically, if you're not sold on Ajin at this point, I don't know what we can say to convince you, because seriously, it is one of the best manga currently running. I believe that without a shadow of a doubt. Like, it is absolutely excellent.
Yeah, this really could become, like, one of my all-time favorites if the ending goes well.
Yeah, depending on the way it ends. Yeah, definitely. I could definitely see this ranking among my all-time favorites. It's that good.
Yeah, this was a good surprise. I like it when manga surprises me positively.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes negatively isn't bad either, because then I have tons of shit to talk on it. But it's nice to read good stuff every once in a while.
Yeah, no, this Ajin was a very pleasant surprise, a really great lead. I was really glad to go through it finally.
I hope Casey's listening, so because I know I remember him saying he wanted us to convince him on Ajin, so I'm hoping he's listening.
Right. I will say that for people who are going in expecting a horror manga, it's not really a horror manga. It's more of it is a action series. There is some aspects of psychological horror, especially in the beginning couple of volumes, but it is more of a horror action series with this interesting perspective on humanity and on morality.
It does have some slight horror elements. They do exist, but yeah, I was totally expecting a horror manga, but what we got was more of a suspenseful action thriller, which I'm totally fine with.
A suspenseful action thriller with a brain.
Yes.
Which is all the more rare and all the more welcome. It's one of the best of its kind, for sure.
Yeah, so it's on Crunchyroll if you want to read it digitally. It's available from Vertical if you want to read it physically. Just go read it. Like, we 100% recommend it. It's super good.